Testing 1, 2, 3. Is that good? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started in our second Catholic Central Leadership Conference presentation today. And we're very, very happy and proud to have former graduate Emily Prentice. And we'll go over a few of her credentials in a little bit. But what do you think about this Manic Monday? Don't you wish it was Sunday? That's play day. But now we're at another Manic Monday. So anyway, we're going to lead off with our opening prayer. St. Elizabeth Seton, our patron saint, and the namesake of our chapel upstairs. I'll have some opening remarks and introduce Emily. Obviously, Emily is our lead presenter, and we'll have a Q&A session. We'll have a closing prayer led by Emily, and then we'll be graced with our elementary choir, sing Amazing Grace, and then we'll have lunch, and we'll be finished, okay? So with that, I'm going to have Laura Williams come up and say our opening prayer. Thank you.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear God, thank you for bringing all of us here together today. Help us to be open to all of the ideas Miss Prentice will share with us about her own personal story of her faith and leadership throughout her life. Help us to see these ideas as a foundation for how to be leaders around our Catholic Central community and be a sign of God's loving mercy, just as Elizabeth Ann Seton was in the face of pain and sorrow. Help us to learn to lead others to love like you. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and teacher. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Well, Emily was here back in the 1990s and late 80s. She graduated here in 1992. Emily had a prestigious academic career. She's gone on and had a wonderful law degree career. Once she graduated here at Catholic Central, she went to the University of Dayton and graduated in 1996, where she graduated cum laude. For those that don't know what that means, it's a prestigious GPA award. UD probably 3.5, 3.7, somewhere around that range. Yeah, it's around, typically that's what they are. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in history and English. She went on from there, graduated with a JD, Doctor of Law degree in 2002 from DePaul University College of Law. She had a very, very successful law career. She's been involved in class action suits, patent infringement and litigation, insurance and healthcare fraud, violations and racketeering, influence and corrupt organization, the RICO Act, civil conspiracy, violations of unfair and deceptive trade practice laws, and violation of whistleblower statutes, and many more. So if you want to go to the left in your career, you might meet up with Emily someday. So I hope none of you go that way. She has a husband, Andrew. They've been married since 2006. They have two wonderful children, Michael and John. Can you guys stand up? And her wonderful mother, Susan's here today. Susan. So the long and short of it is that we're very privileged to have Emily here, and I hope you get a lot out of her presentation. please ask questions at the end. That sometimes is the best way to learn. Okay? Thanks. Emily?
Well, thank you to Dave Fuller for having me here today, and to all of you, and I'm very sorry you didn't get a snow day. I know if I were in your shoes, I would have been hoping for that. Thanks to Dave Simonton for asking me to be here today. I don't know where Dave is in the crowd. But Dave's niece, Becky, and I were very good friends growing up. And I've known Dave since I was a little girl. So when he called to ask me, I said yes. It's nice to see my boys back there. We live in suburban Chicago, so we came in on Saturday and spent the weekend with my mom. And it's nice to be back here. I told my mom on the way over here today, I don't think I have been back in this school since maybe I graduated. I had a younger brother who graduated in 1994, so I may have been back to see him play basketball, but it's been a long time. And the school has changed quite a bit. It's beautiful. It's a really neat facility. But although a lot of things have changed, I betcha a lot of things are still the same around here. When they asked me to come here today, I was flattered. I'm a little nervous, a little embarrassed that they wanted me. But then I thought, if I were you sitting in your shoes and I had a speaker like me come, what are the things that I would want to know? And to the extent any of you are interested in going into the law, I'm going to try to walk you through what college was like for me, what law school was like for me, and I've worked in litigation. I'm a trial attorney for about 15 years. So I'm going to walk you through what that's like, and please do ask questions. I hope that I'm, very approachable. You can ask me anything. And I made some notes. So I graduated from St. Teresa. That's where I went all through grade school, and I know things have changed a little bit, and the schools are consolidated, but I grew up a few blocks from St. Teresa, went through first through 8th grade, and I started here at Catholic Central in 1998. And I loved this high school. I played tennis for 4 years. I loved school spirit. I loved going to all the sporting events, cheering our football team and our soccer team. I see Mrs. Loftus over there, whose boys all played soccer, and I see Matt Mullen, our basketball hero, sitting in the back. We had a great basketball team when I was in school here, and I used to love going to the games. I loved going to the dances, shopping for dresses with my friend Susan Mullen until our mothers probably wanted to drag us out by our hair over our indecision. And I really made lifelong friends here. Susan Mullen was in my wedding. Becky Simonton, Dave's niece, was in my wedding, and I was just out to visit Becky in Colorado last month. So, it's a little town, it's a little school, but the bonds that you make here will stick with you throughout your life. And looking back, I'm really appreciative at the solid academic foundation that this school provided for me. Throughout my life, in college, in law school, when I was out, and especially when I was out, I encountered people who went to the most prestigious prep schools and universities in the country. And I have always felt that I was just as well prepared as they were, that I was just as capable as they were, that I had the same solid academic foundation that kids who went to bigger, fancier high schools and universities did because of the education I got here at Catholic Central. In particular, I always loved English and social studies, history. And this is where I learned to be a critical thinker and a critical reader, and someone who could organize their thoughts and express them in writing and orally. I fell in love with learning at this school. I graduated in 1992 and went on to the University of Dayton. I was an English major to start, and after a few semesters of taking really amazing history classes, I decided to add history as a major as well. And I loved college. I loved the opportunity that you have in college to explore so many different subjects. You know, in high school, everyone takes math, they take social studies, you take a language. When you get to college, you have the opportunity to take electives outside of whatever you've chosen to study. And who knows, some elective you take could take you on a different path in life. I took classes, I had a class about the 1960s. I took an entire class that was dedicated to conspiracy theories about JFK's assassination. You know, I took my first sociology class, my first political science class. And I really think college is an opportunity not only to meet people from all over and different backgrounds, but to try different things, take different classes. Maybe you think you want to be a doctor and you take an art history class and that changes your life. Use the opportunity that you will have in college to try different things and learn different things. You know, when I was graduating from college, I knew a lot of friends who already had jobs lined up, or they had already applied to graduate school and they were going to law school or to business school. I had really no idea what I wanted to do. Now, my dad, Doug Henson, who graduated from Central in 1965, he was a lawyer. So that was something I think I always sort of thought about. But I was not convinced that's what I wanted to do. And I was afraid that if I went straight into law school, I would sort of never know what else is out there. So I didn't apply right away. Instead, I moved to Chicago with some of my friends from Dayton who had grown up in the suburbs there. And in hindsight, that was a great move for me. Chicago is a great city for those of you who have gotten to go there. I lived on the north side in a little rinky-dink apartment. We could walk to Cubs games. We took the L into the city. It was great. However, I needed a job. And not knowing what I wanted to do, I sort of had my first lesson in networking. So I got to Chicago, and I sat down and sent letters to any alumni contacts I could find anywhere who worked in areas that I thought I might be interested in. I was a Pi Phi in college. That was my sorority. I sent letters to Pi Phis who were in different things that I thought I might be interested in. I looked for Dayton alumni. I looked for Catholic Central alumni. And I got some job offers that way. You never know what connection you might meet when you're, out in the world. And you should never be afraid to hit people up and ask. Email people. It happened to me 2 weeks ago. A kid who's clerking for the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Michigan reached out to me because he's interested in coming to Chicago and he saw that I went to DePaul. You never know where those kinds of opportunities are going to lead you. And no one is ever bothered. In fact, you're usually flattered when people hit you up for that kind of advice. So just a little lesson in networking. Never be afraid to ask, because if you don't ask, you won't get. I ended up getting a job ultimately at the Merchandise Mart in Chicago. And for those of you who do not know what the Merchandise Mart is, it is a ginormous building on the Chicago River downtown. So big, in fact, it has its own zip code. I worked as an event planner there for 3 years. The Mart is filled with furniture showrooms, high-end residential furniture, and what they call contract furniture, which is everything from the chairs you're sitting in now to office furniture, waiting room furniture. And my company produced trade shows for design professionals to come. And it was a union building, so I worked with union electricians, teamsters, carpenters to make sure the show floor was constructed to the specifications of the vendors coming in. And I planned the parties, the special events. I worked with outside vendors like caterers and the people that you rent tables and chairs and linens from to coordinate these events. It was a really fun first job. I got to travel quite a bit. I didn't make a lot of money, but I was able to support myself, which was a very good lesson. And after about 3 years there, though, I was sort of bored. I'd been through the same shows over and over, and I thought, I need to move on, it's time. And at first I thought, well, this is what I know, so I'll just go to a different event planning, a bigger event planning venue in Chicago. But then I realized that I really kind of missed the academic rigors of college. I missed the intellectual challenges. And all of a sudden it hit me, I was ready for law school. I was ready to do something that I thought would provide an intellectual challenge long term. So I decided to apply. I think I shocked my parents, who I think had given up on that. Not that they ever pushed me one way or another, but they knew I had thought about it, and I think they thought I had just moved on. And I loved Chicago, so I only applied to schools in Chicago, and I ended up starting at DePaul University's College of Law, which is right downtown in the Loop in Chicago in 1999. And at that time, I had been out of college for 3 years, and I'll tell you, I was really glad I waited. I do not think that is necessarily the right decision for everyone. My own dad used to say that he needed to continue the trajectory of school, because if he stopped, he didn't think he would ever go back. For me, it was a really good decision. I was a little bit more mature, I was serious, I knew it's what I wanted to do, and I was ready to buckle down and start that next chapter in my life. And I'm glad I waited, because law school is very different from college and high school. High school and college are actually pretty similar. You sit in, a classroom, and if you have a question, you raise your hand. If the teacher asks a question of you, you raise your hand. You take quizzes and tests throughout the term, and they all add up to your final grade. In law school, they use what's called the Socratic method. That means that you're put into a section your first year, and you go to class, and your professor gets up and gives a lecture, and he or she calls on one student for that class, period. And it's a back and forth between you and the professor. So you had better be prepared, because if you're not prepared, you look foolish, you're thought less highly of, and it's sort of the point of being there. Law school requires a lot of discipline. It's a lot of reading and a lot of studying, more than I had ever done in my entire life. And I wanted to make sure I was prepared. And the other interesting thing about law school is you only get one exam per semester. That's your whole grade. And it's extremely competitive, because at most traditional law schools, they only allocate a certain number of A's, B's, C's. So you are competing with your classmates to place as high as you can on the exam to get the A's and get the B's. But law school, especially your first year, is pretty much the same anywhere you go. You take contracts, you take torts, which are non-contractual civil injuries, things like negligence or product liability. You take real property, to this day, the most hated class I have ever taken. Legal writing, and you take constitutional law, what law students call con law, which, by the way, is the subject that President Obama taught when he taught at the University of Chicago. Constitutional law, to me, was the most academically challenging class I think I've ever taken. It is the study of the application of the Constitution and its amendments to everyday facts and legal issues. That is where you learn about the decisions where they segregated the United States and then years later ruled that segregation was unconstitutional. You study freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the civil rights laws. It was challenging, but that was my favorite class, hands down, in law school. My second year of law school, I was invited to join the law review, which is a real honor to a law student. Traditionally, they invite the top 10% of the class to join law review. And the law review is an academic journal that most law schools publish on a quarterly basis. I spent my second and third year working with a student editor who was a year ahead of me to write a very long academic paper that was ultimately published. And the other thing that happens in your second year of law school is, especially in big cities like Chicago, the big law firms come to campus to recruit and interview you for a job that's called being a summer associate, which is pretty much the greatest gig. Because if you get hired, you get to go to a law firm for the summer. You are paid like a first-year attorney. You get a first-year salary. And you get to try lots of different legal projects. You get staffed on real cases. That was a real eye-opener for me. I was fortunate enough to get hired by my current firm, Catton, the summer after my second year. And I think most law students, when they think of being a lawyer, I think most people think of litigators. You think of trial attorneys. You think of, Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird, or Paul Newman in The Verdict, or Susan might think of Ally McBeal. No laugh. Probably no one knows who that is. She was on TV in the 90s. She was a lawyer. But in reality, there are many, many, many different ways to be a lawyer, and many of them never involve setting foot in a courtroom. At my own firm, there are lawyers who they work on corporate transactions. They handle merger and acquisition deals, or they consult with clients on regulatory matters. So they may represent banking systems or healthcare systems. There are lawyers who prosecute patents. They have clients who have an idea, they want to have it patented, and you need to hire a lawyer to petition the United States Patent and Trademark Office to patent your idea. A lot of entertainment and sports agents are attorneys, and they negotiate the contracts their celebrity and athlete clients enter into. There are public interest lawyers, people who dedicate their lives to representing the poor and the disenfranchised. Those are people who work with asylum seekers, people coming to this country seeking political asylum, people who have had their rights trampled upon, they've been discriminated against, prisoners who have been wrongfully convicted, things like that. Judges are almost always lawyers, and judges employ clerks who are also lawyers who research and provide recommendations on how judges should rule in cases. The United States employs numerous lawyers. The Department of Justice, pretty much every federal department you can think of provides lawyers to help consult on statutory and regulatory matters. There are federal prosecutors, people like us, they're also called U.S. attorneys, who prosecute crimes on behalf of the federal government. And in every state, there are state's attorneys, sometimes they're called district attorneys, who prosecute violations of state law on behalf of the state. And even within litigation, which is my specialty, there are people who can subspecialize 1,000 different ways. At my own firm, we have intellectual property and patent litigators who litigate copyright, trademark, and patent matters. We have employment litigators who only litigate employment matters. There are litigators who specialize in class action, prosecutions, and defense. We have a large white-collar criminal practice at my firm where we represent people who are often accused of white-collar crimes, and securities and finance litigators who represent clients accused of violating federal securities laws. So I came to Catton that summer, and I really took the opportunity to try as many different things as I could. I got a real estate project, I got a corporate project, I got some litigation projects. And ultimately, I decided that litigation was the best fit for me, but I had a lot of friends who came that summer thinking, well, I'll be a litigator, that's what lawyers do. And they ended up going into some other practice that they didn't even know existed when they started their summer. So at the end of my summer, I was fortunate. I got an offer to come back. That's sort of the object of your summer associate position. You want to work hard and get an offer to be rehired back. And if that happens, you are hired back and given a stipend the summer after you graduate so that you can study for the bar exam. The bar exam is the exam that you have to sit for in any state you want to practice to be licensed legally to practice law. And in most states, it's a 2 to 3 day exam all day long. In Illinois, it was a 2-day exam. The first full day was all multiple choice. It's called the multi-state bar examination. You will take that no matter where you practice. The second day is all essays. And there was one practical, I guess, sort of component where they gave you like a fake case file and you had to do an assignment. It is a 2-day test in July and you get your results in the fall. And I was fortunate enough to pass. I remember the moment my now husband, then I guess boyfriend, not fiance, had gotten the mail for me because I thought it had come that day. And I was standing on an L platform underneath where the 2 L's, the elevated trains in Chicago, were. And I was like, read it. Because you got a letter and it gave you a number. And you had to go to a website and see if your number was among the thousands of people who had sat. And I remember just saying, read it. And he finally said, you passed. And I think I just stood there and cried. I was so relieved. I started at Catton in 2002. A few years later, my fiance then had taken a job. He had finished graduate school in finance and moved to St. Paul. So I moved to Minneapolis and went to work for a firm up there called Robbins Kaplan. I worked there for 3 years in the litigation department also. And in 2008, I had an opportunity to come back to Catton in Chicago, and we moved back to Chicago. And that is where my 2 boys now live. We moved out of the city after my older son John was born. We live in Winnetka, which is a suburb north of the city. Over the course of my career, I've worked on many different kinds of litigation matters. A lot of just complex commercial business disputes. I've handled class action defenses. I've worked on patent infringement suits. And over the last 10 years, my specialty has been healthcare and insurance fraud litigation. What we do in that practice is we work with insurance companies and we work with the fraud investigators who are employed by the insurance companies to investigate and bring affirmative litigation against medical providers who are engaged in systemic fraud. So we see a lot of providers who subject every patient who walks through their door to the same medically unnecessary diagnostic testing, and then they bill the insurance company. Or everyone who walks through the door at a physical therapy place gets the same exact treatment regardless of what their own individual needs are. Or it can be as egregious as doctors subjecting everyone to pain management injections or even surgical procedures that are not medically necessary. And we bring affirmative lawsuits, meaning that we file on behalf of the insurance companies against these medical providers, and our complaints virtually always sound in fraud. We have many times used the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the RICO statute, and we've alleged that the medical providers constitute an illegal enterprise and they're violating racketeering laws. We've used state whistleblower statutes. Sometimes they're referred to in the news as key TAM actions. And we've, used other legal theories to attack the fraudulent practices these providers are engaged in. And the thing about litigation is all litigation kind of works the same. In order to initiate a lawsuit, an individual or an entity known as a plaintiff files a complaint, and it can be filed in state court or federal court. I mainly practice in federal court. And then an answer, or sometimes a motion to dismiss, is filed in response. And if the case is not dismissed, you start what's called the discovery process. That's when you get to take depositions of the other side's witnesses, and they can depose your witnesses. You can seek documents from each other. You may retain, and we frequently do retain, experts who provide very detailed opinions. And if the case makes it to trial, and it doesn't happen a lot, I've been practicing since 2002. I've been to trial twice and to arbitration, which is similar once, because cases are often either resolved on motion or settled, which means the parties say, let's stop litigating, let's come to an agreement. It often involves the payment of some money, but then you dismiss the lawsuit. But if you do get to trial, trials are, all the same as well. There's an opening statement. You get to take the direct and cross-examination of the witnesses. You present the evidence, you give closing arguments, and then if you are before a jury, the jury deliberates and provides a verdict. If the parties have not opted for a jury, it's called a bench trial, and the judge issues an opinion. And then post-judgment motions and appeals often follow a trial. But the point is that the litigation process, regardless of what you specialize in, is all sort of the same, and it's a complicated and very interesting process. You follow rules known as the rules of civil procedure and the federal rules of evidence, and it all sort of works so that justice can prevail. So that's a lot of info, and that's a lot of my story. You all have your stories. I guess if I had a few just pieces of advice to pass along, it would be this. I personally think that, success in life, which you can measure a million different ways, I think about 50% of it comes down to the choices that you make and your hard work. And the other 50% really comes from having opportunities come your way that you recognize as opportunities and you seize. So, my advice to you is go out and be citizens of the world. Learn as much as you can and take as many opportunities as you can to learn. Read, travel if you can, be informed, have opinions about things, vote, please vote. Don't be afraid to fail and make mistakes, because it happens to all of us all the time. It's what you learn from those failures and mistakes that really matters. I think that your life it goes through chapters. And it goes through chapters at different levels, personally and professionally. And it's okay to make big changes or to go on to that next chapter. Just, be prepared to work hard, be realistic, be practical, but take advantage of those opportunities that come your way. Believe in yourselves, and just know that there's really no one great measure of success. I am as proud of my two boys in the back of this room as I am of my professional career. And, just keep your eyes on keep your eyes on the ball in life, I guess is my advice to you. So please, now, who has questions for me? Anything about school, practicing law, Chicago? Anyone? Yeah.
So about the bar exams, say you were to take it past the lawyer, would you have to retake it if you wanted to practice in, say, any other state?
Yeah, a really good question, and I wish my husband was here so I could give him a dirty look. The question is, if you take a bar exam in one state and you move to a different state, do you have to take the bar exam again? And the answer is it depends. So generally, if you take a bar exam and pass in one state and you choose to move somewhere else, it used to be within 2 years, you could waive in your MBE score, your multiple choice, and only sit for the essay portion. If you have practiced in a jurisdiction for more than 5 years and the state that you're in happens to have a reciprocal relationship with the state you're currently practicing, you can often do what's called waiving in or get moved for admission. So it's that horrible spot between 2 years and 5 years where you just have to sit all over again. And when I got married, we moved to Minnesota, and I had been out of school about 3.5 years, so I had to sit for the Minnesota bar exam all over again, which I did pass, and I had a very supportive firm who let me take bar review up there all over again. You take like a whole separate class to do the bar exam. But that's long and the short, and you just need to research if and when that ever happens to you, your state laws in whatever state you're considering moving to. Like California, you always have to resit. They don't have reciprocal relationships with any others, and California's bar exam is notoriously difficult. But a lot of states you can either waive your MVE scores or waive in later if you've practiced long enough. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there anything you did in high school around our age that you think was particularly beneficial to your future career, something that you would suggest the rest of us should try and make happen?
All right, so the question was, is there anything I did in high school that I thought was really beneficial? Honestly, you know, a lot of what I do as a lawyer is read and research and write. I write a lot, legal briefs, motions, and I really, looking back, always felt like English class here and writing courses I took in college, because you're always improving as a writer. I mean, even today, I'm not the best writer I want to be. We're always sort of refining those skills. I think any classes that give you the opportunity to become a critical reader, a critical thinker, someone who really analyzes what they're writing about and tries to put it down in the most organized, persuasive way, were the most helpful classes to me. Geometry I could have lived without, but I don't find that all that useful today. Anyone else, questions? Yeah. Okay, the question is, how many hours do I work on average per day? So it depends on where you practice. In most big cities, we have, I work on a billable hour type situation. So I am meant to bill 2,000 hours a year. Now, not everything I do in a day is billable, but if I'm being really efficient, and I will tell you, I have become much more efficient since having children because I want to get in and get my work done and get home. I try to bill on average around 8 hours a day, but I work a lot. I have a lot of flexibility, I will say, and especially now with email and the ability to work from home and bring your laptop and do things. I have flexibility, so it's not uncommon for me to bring work home. I take the train to and from Winnetka to the city every day. I work a lot on the train. I bring work home with me. I'll look at things on the weekend. Although I am very much someone who compartmentalizes my life, especially having kids, small children at home and working. But on average, if you can bill about 8 hours a day, it keeps you on track. Now, if you work in smaller markets or if you're not at a big firm, it may be very different. When I was in Minneapolis, I think my billable hour requirement was $18.50. So it was a little less intense. I mean, Chicago and New York are probably two of the more intense big firm type markets. And I work for a very big firm, I should just mention. Catton is a firm, it was founded in the 70s. It's called Catton Zavis. And then in early 2000s, it merged with Rosenman Collins, which was a New York firm. And Catton employs around 600 lawyers worldwide. In my office, there's close to 300 attorneys practicing in, we're what's called a multi-service firm. We have corporate practices, real estate practices, litigation practices, and wills and trusts, sort of any other areas you can think of. And we have offices, we're headquartered in Chicago, we have offices in New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, London, Charlotte, Shanghai, Dallas, Houston, and many other cities. But I work for what they call a big law, like big law. And so my billable hour rate is on the high end of what it would be many other places. And you get better at it as you go along. You get more efficient, you get to know what you're doing, and I can get a lot more done now in a lot less time than I could 10 years ago. And I'll say this too, I think it's important to sort of, to some extent, set some limits. I have colleagues that work all the time, and I don't think that's healthy for anyone. I think that you need to sort of set limits for yourself because you need time to recharge. I don't know that my superiors would like hearing me say that, but it's the truth. Anyone else? Yes? Oh, okay.
What made you choose your first job? Like, how'd you pick it?
Oh, my first job, that's a good question. At the Merchandise Mart, they kind of chose me. So I moved to Chicago with friends, and I sent out all those letters. And the other thing I did was I temped. Do you guys know what temping is? You go to an agency, and they say, well, here's a temporary job. And I had some girlfriends who had gone on temp jobs that led to long-term jobs. So we all went to this temp agency. One of my friends ended up working for the temp agency. Her kids go to Sidney Lehman now. And my first and only temp job was in the event planning department at the Merchandise Smart. It was Merchandise Smart Properties was the name of the company. And they were in the middle of one of their huge markets, and they needed temporary help. And I worked really hard that week, and my boss hired me. So I just stayed there. It was fun. Anyone else? Questions? Mr. O'Neill?
Did you find, was it in your thought process back then, being a young woman wanting to become an attorney, mostly male dominated, did that have an effect on anything you did or where you went to your job, or, and is it better now with your experience?
So the question is, the legal profession has traditionally been male dominated. Did that factor in my thought process? I'll tell you, it's better now. It's still far from great. Women go to law school at the same or even higher rates than men, as do students of color. And I graduated with an extremely diverse class at DePaul and started with a very diverse class, very evenly split between men and women at Catton. And there is a lot of attrition. And I think the people in charge will tell you, well, women make other choices. I think the truth is that women see that the path is going to be more difficult for them, and so they might opt to make another choice. But I'll say this, if you work hard, you can get where you want to get. And you should never, ever, I don't personally think, let the fact that something might be male dominated, I'm speaking to the women, don't ever let that stop you. Don't let them tell you you're not good enough, or that, the men are, in more of a position to be partners, because it's just not true. And you might get that message occasionally. I know I have, and I just never bought into it, because I always believed in myself, and I believe in myself to this day. I can do what the boys can do. Anyone else? Okay. Do I have any regrets with the classes that I took in high school or college? Well, certainly not in high school, because here it's much more set curriculum. In college, I don't think I had regrets as much as sometimes you'd be a little disappointed that you'd sign up for a class because it sounded really interesting, and maybe it wasn't as interesting as you thought, or maybe the teacher wasn't as good as you thought. But just through that too, you learn and you move on, and maybe it's just an area that didn't interest you, and you're like, well, I checked that off the box. I'm never doing that again. But I would say anything that you think might be a good fit for you, try it. Yeah.
What was your favorite, out-of-the-box course that you took in college?
What was my favorite out-of-the-box class that I took in college? It was not new math, which I thought would be very interesting, and I hated. I told you I did take this class all about the various conspiracy theories surrounding JFK's assassination, and it was fascinating. And we didn't ever really decide that one made more sense than another, but it was really compelling. I took a class that was all about, it was a summer school class, Stephen King. We read 6 of his books, and we watched the movies. And I think half of Dayton's basketball team was in the class with me, because they needed to probably make up coursework over the summer. But that was a really fun class. And I took another film class at Dayton that I loved, and I learned a lot about the filmmaking process and famous filmmakers, editors, people I didn't know a lot about. And then in law school, actually, I got to take, when I was maybe in my 3rd year, I guess it was my 2nd year, a class called Law and Film, because I've always liked movies. And I've never done anything with that, although my son is an aspiring movie maker. So those were really fun, out-of-the-box classes for me, but I enjoyed them. Other questions? No? You guys have been a great audience. Thank you. So now we're going to recite the Our Father together. So, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thanks, everyone.
Well, I hope you all have liked Emily's presentation. That's what this series is all about, is to help you guys get ready for the next step in life. Now we're going to get the privilege of the next generation that's going to be in this room someday to sing Amazing Grace.